Augments are probably the largest addition to Chapter 4, and for the most part, they are great, but there's one augment that needs to be talked about, because in my opinion, it just isn't good for the health of the game. The augment in question is the forecast augment. To explain the first part of my argument, I'm going to use a graph that I created to explain my issue with the forecast argument. I call it the SBF chart. No, not you. The scale of brokenness compared to how fun an item is. So if an item is over here, then it's both not broken, and it is also not fun. Think of a makeshift weapons or like a great classic pistol. These items go over here because they aren't that fun to use and they're kind of just bad. Then as we move over to the right side of the graph, we have fun but bad weapons. There are not too many examples of this because these items aren't really used that much, but think of something like a clinger. It's a good example here. Then as we move up the right side of the graph, we have the golden zone. This is where items are both very balanced and very fun. Some examples of this would be like bouncers or mat movement or armored walls. If an item is in the golden zone, this means that it is a very good item that Epic Games should keep as a main staple of the game, as it is both very balanced and is very fun, making the entire experience of playing Fortnite more enjoyable. As we move up this chart, we start getting to the very OP items. This would include your mythic items or items like the hammer or shockwave grenades. These items are all extremely broken, and in my opinion, they're bad for the game, but the majority of the community tends to like these wacky and overpowered items because they are fun to use. Although these items hurt the quality of matches, they bring excitement to the community, so there's a valuable trade-off to having these items in competitive Fortnite. But where does that leave the forecast augment? Well, from what I've seen, no one is extremely excited to get the forecast augment because of how much more fun it makes the gameplay. People are only excited to get the augment because it makes the game much easier. If an item is ever in the top left corner of the SBF chart, then I think it should be grounds for removal. The item is not really fun to use, but people still use it because it gives them a massive advantage. And honestly, this would be fine if everyone had access to the forecast augment, but the biggest problem is that getting forecast is entirely luck-based. There's no way to increase your odds of getting forecast, and for players who are incredibly unlucky, they might have to play whole tournaments without the forecast, putting them at a huge disadvantage. Forecast simply makes the game easier to rotate through while not actually doing anything interesting. Forecast only allows for more optimal walking rotations, and if it's between me and you, this is not the most entertaining gameplay I've ever watched. But by adding the forecast augment, you make it even more boring by removing a lot of the complex strategy behind mid-game positioning. If forecast was just a mid-game issue though, I wouldn't care enough to make a whole video on it. Forecast's largest issue comes in the endgame. Forecast fundamentally breaks the way that professional teams tarp in endgame. Before the forecast, teams would be forced to always deep tarp into moving zones because if the zone did not play back, it would be very likely that they would die or get massively griefed while rotating to the next zone. Instead, this season, many top-tier teams can simply stop right as they get into the zone because they know it will play backwards. This completely changes endgames from an RNG avoidance and reacting to what the random scenario that is put in front of you and being forced to come up with a creative plan on the fly to simply playing the best position for the next moving zone that you can perfectly predict and plan for. This removes a lot of the fast choices that pro teams have to make and slows down the pacing of endgames. Hopefully this video reaches someone at Epic Games because the forecast objectively makes competitive Fortnite less interesting and should be removed. Anyways, normal videos will return next week. Peace.